The first thing that caught my attention was the way Natalie's dress clung to her. It wasn't just the dress, it was the way she moved in it, like she was daring the room to look. We were at the gala, one of those charity events where everyone pretends to care about the cause but really just wants to be seen. Natalie had been excited about it for weeks, picking out the dress, the shoes, the jewelry. She'd even asked me to help her zip it up earlier that evening, her back bare and smooth under my fingers. But now, standing in the middle of the room, she seemed like a stranger. I was nursing a glass of champagne, trying to look like I belonged, when a man I didn't recognize sidled up to me. He was tall, with a sharp jawline and a smirk that made my skin crawl. "Your wife," he said, nodding toward Natalie, "is quite the talk of the evening." I forced a smile, the kind that doesn't reach your eyes. "She always is." He chuckled, but there was something in his tone, something that made my stomach twist. "Lucky man," he said before disappearing into the crowd. I turned back to Natalie. She was laughing at something one of the other guests had said, her head thrown back, her hand resting lightly on his arm. It was innocent enough, but there was a familiarity in the way she touched him that made my chest tighten. I tried to shake it off. Natalie was always the life of the party, always the center of attention. It was one of the things I loved about her. But tonight, it felt different. I watched as she leaned in to whisper something in the man's ear, her lips brushing against his skin. My grip tightened around the glass in my hand. She was wearing a black dress that hugged her curves, the fabric shimmering under the chandelier lights. It was stunning, but as she turned, the slit in the side of the dress parted, revealing a flash of bare skin. My breath caught. She wasn't wearing anything underneath. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I felt a wave of heat rush to my face, a mix of anger and embarrassment. Was she trying to make me jealous? Or was it something else? My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. Natalie had always been confident, but this felt deliberate. Calculated. I took a step toward her, but before I could reach her, she was swept away by another man, his hand resting lightly on the small of her back. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The room seemed to close in around me, the chatter of the crowd fading into a dull roar. I felt like I was drowning, the weight of my suspicions pressing down on me. I needed air. I set my glass down on a passing tray and made my way to the balcony, the cool night breeze doing little to calm the storm inside me. I leaned against the railing, staring out at the city lights, trying to steady my breathing. My mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, each one more unsettling than the last. Was I overreacting? Or was there something going on that I didn't want to see? I heard the door open behind me, and for a moment, I hoped it was Natalie. But when I turned, it was the same man from earlier, the one with the smirk. He leaned against the doorframe, his arms crossed, studying me with a look that made my skin crawl. "You know," he said, his voice low, "if I were you, I'd keep a closer eye on her." My blood ran cold. What's that supposed to mean? He shrugged, a lazy, infuriating gesture. Just a friendly piece of advice. She's a beautiful woman, after all. And beauty like that, it attracts attention. I wanted to punch him, to wipe that smug look off his face. But before I could say anything, he was gone, disappearing back into the crowd. I stood there, my hands clenched into fists, my mind racing. What did he know? What had he seen? I turned back to the railing, my heart pounding in my chest. The city lights blurred as my vision swam with unshed tears. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, teetering, waiting for the ground to give way. And then, as if on cue, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, my hands trembling. It was a text from Natalie. "Having fun," it read. "Don't wait up." I stared at the screen, the words burning into my retinas. Don't wait up. What did that mean? Was she planning to come home late? Or was she not planning to come home at all? I felt a surge of anger, hot and blinding. I wanted to storm back inside, to confront her, to demand answers. But something stopped me. A voice in the back of my mind, cold and calculating. Not here. Not now. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to calm down. I needed to think, to figure out what was really going on. But one thing was clear, tonight had changed everything. And I wasn't sure if I was ready for what came next. I didn't sleep that night. Natalie came home just after 3 a.m., her heels clicking softly against the hardwood floor as she tiptoed into the bedroom. She smelled like champagne and someone else's cologne. I lay there, pretending to be asleep, my body rigid under the sheets. My mind was a whirlwind of questions, each one more torturous than the last. Who was she with? Where had she been? And why did she feel the need to lie to me? The next morning, I called in sick to work. I couldn't focus, couldn't think about anything but Natalie and the way she'd looked at that gala, the way she'd touched that man's arm, the way she'd texted me not to wait up. I needed answers, and I wasn't going to get them by sitting around and hoping she'd tell me the truth. I started with the security footage from our building's lobby. It was a long shot, but I had to try. I logged into the system, my hands trembling as I scrolled through the timestamps. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. There she was, coming home late, not just from the gala, but on other nights too. Nights when she'd said she was working late, nights when she'd claimed to be out with friends. And she wasn't alone. A tall, muscular man was with her, his arms slung casually around her shoulders. They were laughing, their heads close together like they were sharing a secret. My stomach churned as I watched them step into the elevator, the doors closing behind them. I felt like I was going to be sick. I rewound the footage, watching it again and again, hoping I'd missed something, hoping there was some innocent explanation. But there wasn't. The evidence was right there in front of me, undeniable and damning. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to confront her, to demand the truth. But another part of me was terrified of what that truth might be. What if she admitted it? What if she told me she didn't love me anymore? I wasn't sure I could handle that. But I couldn't just sit there and do nothing. I needed to know. I needed to hear it from her. I waited until that evening, when she got home from work. She was in the kitchen, pouring herself a glass of wine, when I walked in. She looked up and smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Hey," she said. "How was your day?" I didn't answer. I just stood there, staring at her, trying to find the words. Finally, I said, "We need to talk." Her smile faltered. "About what?" I took a deep breath, my heart pounding in my chest. "About last night. About the gala. About the man you were with." She set her glass down, her expression unreadable. "What are you talking about?" "I saw you," I said, my voice shaking. "I saw the way you were with him. And I saw the security footage. You've been coming home late, Natalie. With him." For a moment, she just stared at me, her face blank. Then she laughed, a short, bitter laugh that made my blood run cold. "You're being ridiculous," she said. "He's just a friend. We work together. That's all." "A friend," I repeated, my voice rising. "You expect me to believe that? You're not wearing underwear, Natalie. You're texting me not to wait up. You're coming home with him in the middle of the night. Don't insult my intelligence." Her expression hardened, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of guilt in her eyes. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared. "You're paranoid," she said, her voice cold. "You're imagining things. If you don't trust me, that's your problem, not mine." I felt like I'd been slapped. I wanted to scream, to shake her, to make her see how much she was hurting me. But instead, I just stood there, my hands clenched into fists, my chest heaving with the effort of keeping my emotions in check. "I'm not imagining this," I said quietly. "I know what I saw. And I know what you're doing. I need to know why. Why are you doing this to us?" She didn't answer. She just picked up her glass and walked out of the room, leaving me standing there, alone and broken. I didn't follow her. I couldn't. Instead, I went back to the security footage, scrolling through it again, looking for something, anything that might give me closure. And then I saw it. A timestamp from a few weeks ago. Natalie and the man, coming out of the elevator. He was carrying a suitcase. Her suitcase. The one she'd taken on her business trip last month. My heart stopped. She hadn't been on a business trip. She'd been with him. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. All I could do was stare at the screen, the truth staring back at me in stark, unflinching detail. She'd been lying to me. 4 weeks. Maybe longer. And now, there was no denying it. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to move forward. But one thing was clear. Things were never going to be the same. I didn't sleep again that night. The security footage played on a loop in my mind, each frame etching itself deeper into my consciousness. Natalie's laughter, the way she leaned into him, the suitcase, it all screamed betrayal. By morning, I was a wreck, my hands shaking, my thoughts scattered. But one thing was clear. I couldn't live in this limbo anymore. I needed the truth, no matter how much it hurt. I hired a private investigator that same day. His name was Carl, a no-nonsense guy with a reputation for getting results. I gave him everything I had, Natalie's schedule, the man's description, the timestamps from the security footage. Carl didn't ask questions, didn't offer sympathy. He just nodded and said, "I'll call you when I have something." The call came 2 days later. I was at work, pretending to focus on a spreadsheet, when my phone buzzed. I stepped into the hallway, my heart pounding as I answered. "It's Trevor," Carl said without preamble. "Trevor Mills. They've been seeing each other for at least 3 months. Hotels, dinners, the works. I've got photos if you want them." I didn't want the photos. I didn't need them. The name alone was enough to make my knees buckle. Trevor. Of course it was Trevor. The tall, muscular man from the gala, the one with a smirk, the one who'd warned me to keep a closer eye on her. He'd been taunting me, and I'd been too blind to see it. I thanked Carl, hung up, and went back to my desk. I don't remember the rest of the day. I must have gone through the motions, but my mind was elsewhere, replaying every moment, every lie, every excuse Natalie had ever given me. By the time I got home, I was a powder keg, ready to explode. She was in the living room, curled up on the couch with a book. She looked up when I walked in, her smile fading as she took in my expression. "Hey," she said cautiously. "How was your day?" I didn't answer. I just stood there, staring at her, my hands clenched into fists. She set the book down, her brow furrowing. "Neil, what's wrong?" "Trevor," I said, my voice low and trembling. "Who the hell is Trevor?" Her face went pale. For a moment, she just stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Then she shook her head, forcing a laugh. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't lie to me, Natalie," I snapped, my voice rising. "I know everything. The hotels, the dinners, the late nights. I hired a PI. I have proof." Her eyes widened, and for the first time, I saw fear in them. Real, raw fear. She stood up, her hands fluttering nervously. "Neil, please, let me explain." "Explain what?" I shouted, cutting her off. "How you've been lying to me for months. How you've been sneaking around with some guy behind my back. How you've been making a fool out of me." She flinched, tears welling up in her eyes. "It's not what you think," she said, her voice shaking. "He's just a friend. We work together. It's nothing. Stop lying." I roared, slamming my hand against the wall. She jumped, her tears spilling over. "I saw the footage, Natalie. I saw you with him. I saw the suitcase. You weren't on a business trip. You were with him. Admit it." She crumpled then, sinking back onto the couch, her face in her hands. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm so sorry." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I'd known, of course, but hearing her say it, hearing her admit it, was like a knife twisting in my chest. I felt like I couldn't breathe, like the room was closing in around me. "How long?" I asked, my voice breaking. "How long has this been going on?" She didn't answer at first. Then, in a small, broken voice, she said, 3 months. 3 months. 3 months of lies, of deceit, of betrayal. I felt like I was going to be sick. I stumbled back, leaning against the wall for support. "Why?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Why would you do this to us?" She looked up at me, her face streaked with tears. "I don't know," she said, her voice trembling. "I didn't mean for it to happen. It just did. It just did." I repeated, my voice rising again. "You didn't mean for it to happen? Do you hear yourself, Natalie? You threw away our marriage because it just happened?" She didn't answer. She just sat there, crying, while I stared at her, my heart breaking all over again. I felt like I was looking at a stranger, someone I'd never really known. "I want a divorce," I said finally, my voice cold and flat. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with shock. "What?" "No, Neil, please. We can work through this. I'll end it with Trevor. I'll do whatever it takes." "It's too late for that," I said, cutting her off. "You made your choice. Now I'm making mine." She stared at me, her face pale, her lips trembling. Then, slowly, her expression hardened. "Fine," she said, her voice cold. "If that's what you want. But don't think for a second that this is going to be easy. I'll fight you every step of the way." I didn't respond. I just turned and walked out of the room, my heart heavy but my resolve firm. I went to the bedroom and started packing a bag, my hands moving mechanically, my mind numb. Natalie followed me, standing in the doorway, watching me with a mixture of anger and desperation. "You're really leaving?" she asked, her voice trembling. I didn't look at her. "I can't stay here," I said. "Not after this." She didn't try to stop me. She just stood there, silent, as I zipped up the bag and slung it over my shoulder. I walked past her without a word, out of the bedroom, out of the apartment, out of the life we'd built together. The door clicked shut behind me, and for the first time in months, I felt a strange sense of relief. The truth was out. The lies were over. And now, finally, I could start to heal. The days after I left, Natalie blurred together in a haze of anger and numbness. I moved into a cheap motel on the outskirts of the city, the kind of place where the walls were thin and the air smelled like stale cigarettes. I didn't care. It was temporary, a place to crash while I figured out what to do next. But the truth was, I already knew what I was going to do. I just didn't want to admit it to myself. Revenge. The word echoed in my mind like a drumbeat, steady and unrelenting. I couldn't let her get away with what she'd done. She destroyed our marriage, shattered my trust, and left me to pick up the pieces. I wasn't going to let her walk away unscathed. It started with her job. Natalie worked in public relations, a field where reputation was everything. I still had connections from my time in the industry, people who owed me favors. It wasn't hard to plant the seeds of doubt. A few well-placed phone calls, a few whispered rumors, and suddenly Natalie's name was mud. Clients started dropping her, her boss started questioning her judgment, and within a week, she was out of a job. I told myself it was justified. She'd betrayed me, humiliated me, made me feel like I was nothing. This was just payback. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. This was about control. About making her feel even a fraction of the pain she'd caused me. The next step was the media. I reached out to a journalist I knew, a guy who'd been looking for a juicy story. I gave him everything. The photos from the private investigator, the details of her affair with Trevor, even the security footage from our building. It didn't take long for the story to blow up. By the next morning, Natalie's face was plastered across every tabloid in the city. "PRXX scandalous affair," the headline screamed. "Marriage in shambles." I watched it all unfold from the safety of my motel room, my laptop open on the bed, my phone buzzing with messages from people I hadn't heard from in years. Everyone wanted to know if it was true, if Natalie had really cheated on me, if our marriage was really over. I didn't respond. I just sat there, staring at the screen, a strange mix of satisfaction and guilt churning in my gut. It wasn't until later that night, when the initial rush of adrenaline had worn off, that the weight of what I'd done hit me. I lay on the lumpy motel bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. Was this who I was now? A man who destroyed lives for revenge? A man who took pleasure in someone else's pain? I thought about Natalie, about the way she'd looked when I'd confronted her, the tears streaming down her face, the desperation in her voice. I thought about the life we'd built together, the dreams we'd shared, the love we'd once had. And I thought about how it had all come crashing down, how we'd gone from partners to enemies in the blink of an eye. I felt a pang of regret, sharp and unexpected. I didn't want to feel it, didn't want to admit that part of me still cared about her, still mourned what we'd lost. But it was there, buried beneath the anger and the hurt, a tiny flicker of something that refused to be extinguished. I got up and paced the room, my thoughts a tangled mess. I didn't know what to do, how to feel. Part of me wanted to call her, to apologize, to take it all back. But another part of me, the part that was still raw and bleeding, wanted to see her suffer, wanted to make sure she never forgot what she'd done. In the end, I did neither. I just sat back down on the bed, my head in my hands, and let the tears come. I cried for the life we'd lost, for the love we'd destroyed, for the people we'd become. And when the tears finally stopped, I felt empty, hollow, like I'd poured everything I had into the revenge, and now there was nothing left. I knew then that the scars wouldn't heal overnight, that the anger and the pain would linger, a constant reminder of what had happened. But I also knew that I couldn't stay like this, stuck in this cycle of bitterness and regret. I had to find a way to move forward, to rebuild my life, to become someone I could live with. It wouldn't be easy. But for the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope, a tiny spark of light in the darkness. And for now, that was enough. But as I lay back down on the bed, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the lingering sense of anxiety. The fear that no matter what I did, no matter how far I ran, the past would always be there, waiting to pull me back in. And I didn't know if I was strong enough to resist it. The knock on my door came at 2 a.m. I wasn't sleeping, I hadn't slept properly in weeks, but the sound still made my heart leap into my throat. I sat up in bed, my ears straining, my body tense. The knock came again, louder this time, more insistent. I grabbed the baseball bat I kept by the bed and crept to the door, my pulse racing. I didn't open it. Instead, I checked the security feed on my phone. The cameras I'd installed after the divorce showed Natalie standing on my porch, her face pale and drawn, her eyes wild. She was holding something in her hand, a knife, glinting in the dim light. I'd known she was angry, known she hated me, but this was something else. I called 911, my voice low and urgent as I explained the situation. Then I waited, my eyes glued to the screen as Natalie paced back and forth, her movements jerky and erratic. She was muttering to herself, her words too low for the microphone to pick up, but I didn't need to hear them to know what she was saying. She was here to kill me. The thought sent a chill down my spine, but it also filled me with a strange sense of calm. I'd been preparing for this moment, bracing myself for the fallout of everything that had happened. I'd installed the cameras, reinforced the locks, even taken self-defense classes. I wasn't the same man I'd been when I'd left her. I was stronger now, more in control. When the police arrived, Natalie didn't put up a fight. She just stood there, the knife still in her hand, her eyes empty as they cuffed her and led her away. I watched from the window, my heart pounding, my mind racing. It was over. Finally, it was over. But as I sat down on the couch, the adrenaline slowly fading, I realized that it wasn't really over. Not for me. Not yet. The days that followed were a blur. I gave my statement to the police, answered their questions, and tried to wrap my head around what had happened. Natalie was charged with attempted murder, and the media had a field day with the story. "Scorned wife turns killer," the headline screamed. "A marriage gone deadly." I didn't read the articles. I didn't want to. I'd had enough of the drama, enough of the pain. I just wanted to move on. And so I did. I started small, with things I could control. I cleaned the house, got rid of the reminders of Natalie, of our life together. I painted the walls, rearranged the furniture, made the space feel like mine again. It was therapeutic, in a way to reclaim my identity, to remind myself that I was more than just the man she'd betrayed. I also started seeing a therapist. It wasn't easy, talking about my feelings, my fears, my regrets, but it helped. Slowly, I began to untangle the mess of emotions inside me, to make sense of what had happened and why. I realized that I'd been holding on to a lot of anger, a lot of pain, and that it had been eating me alive. But now, for the first time, I felt like I was starting to let it go. The moment of epiphany came one evening, as I was sitting on the porch, watching the sun set. I'd been thinking about Natalie, about everything that had happened, and suddenly it hit me. This wasn't the end. It was a new beginning. The end of our relationship had been painful, yes, but it had also freed me. Freed me to rediscover who I was, to figure out what I wanted, to build a life that was truly mine. It wasn't going to be easy. I knew that. There would still be days when the anger and the hurt would bubble up, when the memories would threaten to pull me back under. But for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. Hopeful that I could move forward, that I could find happiness again, that I could be more than just the man Natalie had left behind. As I sat there, watching the sky turn from orange to pink to purple, I made a promise to myself. I wasn't going to let the past define me. I wasn't going to let her win. I was going to take control of my life, to rebuild it piece by piece, and to create something better. Something stronger. And as I stood up and walked back inside, I felt a sense of determination settle over me. The road ahead would be long, and there would be bumps along the way. But I was ready. Ready to face whatever came next. Ready to start again. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally free.